everyone, Ben Cooper Radio, episode number 134, I think. But anyway, it doesn't matter, it's all about the information, don't you just worry. So today I am in touch with America. I am in touch with an organisation that I would say are doing some pretty incredible things when it comes to nutritional research. And if there's one area of health and fitness we constantly argue about, obviously outside of diet and training, which is most of the fitness industry, is kind of supplements. It's the stuff that's sold, it's the stuff that's marketed, it's the stuff that we sort of buy into the promises and we're never really sure. Well, the company that I'm talking to today will kind of put some clarity on that, a certain amount of clarity in this podcast, but have got a lot of information on this area that you will want to check out after this podcast if you've not done so already. It's a company that I've talked about a lot before on Facebook. We have them integrated into our education programs as standard, as part of the learning procedure and ongoing learning. Anyway, let's cut to the chase. I'm here today with Kamal Patel from Examinecom. First of all, have I said your name correctly?
That's 100% correct.
Woo! That's the first battle won. Dude, for people that have no idea what you do, aside from Examine first, please give us a little bit of background, who you are, what's the story?
Sure. So, like most people, I became interested in nutrition for weightlifting purposes. Somewhere at the beginning of college, I was thin, or skinny fat, I guess you would call it, around 135 pounds. I used nutrition to get bigger. Just so happened that my next door neighbor in my freshman year dorm was a powerlifter, and he was a heavyweight, and he was the amateur world champ, just randomly. So he told me from the beginning, nutrition is more important than what specifically you do in the gym and, you know, how many reps and how long your pauses are. So I started trying to learn as much as I could. In the next 15 to 20 years, I just kept reading more and more papers. Then I went into public health and got a master's of public health, and eventually went on to go into PhD in nutrition, and I'm taking a hiatus from that right now and working for Examinecom. In the PhD, I was researching the link between nutrition and chronic pain, which actually there's not a ton of research about. So we know that diet's important for pain, but we don't know exactly why. So I think it's an important question, not just for regular people in pain, but also athletes, because athletes get injured all the time, and it's something cool to learn about.
Wow. So in terms of your kind of roles within the fitness industry, it doesn't sound like you've done too much to-in and throw-in. Your kind of path has almost been quite linear at the moment. And I suppose what I'm trying to say is you've been quite focused about it. I've jumped about an awful lot.
Yeah, whenever I tried to jump around, then I just got drawn back into the same thing. So one year I was like, you know, I'm gonna try to go into training and really learn as much as I can and train people, and that lasted for a summer, and I just wasn't a very good trainer. I like reading stuff, and I'm not that great at advising people. So it's perfect for Examine because we don't claim to know what the right, you know, diet or exercise routine is for any particular person. We just say what the strengths and limitations are of different evidence, and that's pretty much it.
So that leads me on to Examine. What is Examine.com? And I suppose leading into what is Examine.com, why does it exist? Like, what happened? What was the rationale? Because what you've created is, I'll be honest, it's colossal.
Yeah, it's massive. Even I can see that. It's almost too big. It got that way from a pretty small start. Our founders were Saul Orwell and Curtis Frank. They met on Reddit. So Reddit fitness, you know, is an active area of discussion. And I mean, Reddit, for some things, like the Reddit front page can be very annoying. But Reddit fitness, it's nice, either for newbies or for people who already know a lot of stuff and want to banter about studies. So they met on Reddit around 2010. They started talking about how there is no central depot of studies on nutrition and supplementation. So they kept telling each other, you know, why don't you start something? Why don't you start something? And then they figured out maybe they should start something together. One had business acumen, one had the technical acumen, and could read studies really well. So it started with, you know, like a creatine page, some other basic pages. Those pages got bigger and bigger. Now the creatine page is, I think, 734 references, and it keeps growing, every single week. And now our goal is to get all the major macronutrients, all the major supplements at some point this year, and then start getting into the more very specific stuff that people want to know about.
Wow. So, bit of clarity. What does it do? What purpose does it serve to the guy that's kind of in the gym?
So, when I started in the gym, then like a lot of people, I went through, I don't know how many years of making nutrition and supplement mistakes. I started out with, I think, part of a drawer was dedicated to supplements. So I had a multivitamin and fish oil. And then at a certain point, I replaced the fish oil with flax oil. And then I started adding those supplements that were popular in the 80s and 90s that people don't really use anymore. And then once I started reading studies, then I was like, there's no evidence behind this. Or if there was evidence, a lot of the things were shown not to work. So I started throwing stuff away. So the best purpose really is saving your money, because you only have a limited amount of money. You should really use it to go on vacation, get some sunlight during the winter. Number two is that some things can be harmful even if you combine them with medications or with certain phenotypes. So safety. And then a third thing is more and more people are really, really curious about nutrition supplementation. And there's not a ton of websites that don't claim to have the answer, that aren't gurus, that just provide information. So the more the merrier, more things like Examine, the better. We don't really care about competition. That's also why it's good to have podcasts that have guests that really are evidence-based, like yours. So really, we're just part of a bigger picture of actually looking at facts and not opinions.
Nice. So I'm interested. You had this supplement drawer. Did it grow or did it shrink the more and more you researched?
It shrank. So at a certain point, let's see, the most supplements I ever took on a daily basis it's almost too embarrassing. I mean, I had one of those pill box holders, and there would be like morning, night, and occasionally even lunchtime, and they wouldn't all fit into the pill holder. So nowadays I take as little as I can. Just the things that are missing from modern diets. And then if I'm trying to increase my performance, or that sounds dirty, not that kind of performance, but gym performance, then I might take a couple other things, but that's it. So I try to take as little as possible now, which is in stark contrast to before.
I think, everyone's got to learn at some point the hard way. I think it's natural for the human psyche to want to believe that there's something better, and it's almost the promise of supplements, that there's this little pot, and you're always just thinking in the back of your mind, you see a supplement and you're like, but what if that was the one that just had that little bit of something? And really,
it can change your life, right?
Yeah, it could change your life. And it's not till we've probably been in the game a good 5, 6, 7 years, and you've been told by lots of different people that the penny actually drops, and you're like, all right then, okay, I'll just take those 3 supplements and make sure my diet and training is correct.
Yeah, it's not as interesting as you'd want it to be, but actually it could be sort of interesting. Like when I first started, one of my first supplements was glutamine. And 5 or 10 years later, I figured out glutamine wasn't doing anything for muscle building, really. But 5 or 10 years after that, I started taking glutamine again for intestinal health. So some things can be repurposed, and some things, maybe you should concentrate on getting the opposite of them. Like the types of fats I used to try to eat before, I try not to eat so much now. Like I load it up with polyunsaturated fatty acids, and maybe it's not so great to have so much of that in your diet now. So it can be interesting.
Examine has obviously gone a huge amount out of their way to collaborate every bit of research that's out there to say, right, this is where the BS is. There's obviously still a certain amount of dogma online. There's still all the marketing trends. Nothing's really changed apart from the work that you're doing in the grand scheme of things. When you look at what's happening in the industry, are you kind of fearful that there are some trends or some dogma that you just won't be able to change because it's just so ingrained in, the fitness fallacy? It's almost so gospel that it seems a little bit uncomprehendable that you can't change that thought process.
Yeah, I'd say it's the internet's fault. I mean, the internet is a double-edged sword. It's the reason why a lot of people stop listening to bro science and reading papers, but it's also the reason why if you're a supplement manufacturer, not that they're all evil, but if you manufacture supplements, it's so easy to get people to buy your supplement. All you have to do is you hire a rep or two, you have them post on the bodybuilding.com forums or some other forums, and then, maybe it worked. Maybe the supplement worked, but it really works often if you use it with other stuff like training and sleep. So then you just write about how it worked, and then other people start using it. You don't have to have any research behind your supplement to start offering it. And then if there are side effects, usually those come in post-market surveillance. So the fact that there's so many supplements out there, and then people always want, one quick, easy fix, which I would too, means that human nature plus internet means it's uphill battle, and it's probably never going to be fully won. But, as long as a few people are impacted, then that's good enough.
Sure. I don't suppose you have a specific example, do you? The only reason why I ask is whenever I do seminars and I deliver like the supplement section of my seminar, there's one thing that always comes up every time I do a seminar, and I'd like you to sort of go into how this came about right from the outset. And that's you can only absorb 30 grams of protein at any one sitting. I get asked at every seminar, how did that come about and why isn't it dying?
So it is a myth, but it's an interesting myth because obviously it's not true. Let's say 1,000, 2,000 years ago, you got a lot of your protein once you killed the bison or something, and then you ate a lot of it. Maybe you stored some for later, but you ate a lot of it then. It's not very efficient to only be able to absorb 30 grams of protein. So it's not true because when you eat a mixed meal with fat and protein and carbs, then hormones like CCK are excreted in your intestine, slowing down digestion, making it possible for you to absorb more amino acids. That being said, there is a little bit of tiny grain of truth in the 30-gram thing because it's not that efficient for muscle building to eat all your protein at one time when compared to more pulsed eating, 3, 4, 5 meals a day. Not to say that that's better to eat more frequently, but if you absolutely want to optimize your muscle building, then you would eat maybe every 3 to 5 hours, maybe even put some BCAAs in between because extra protein is burned, oxidized for energy, rather than all being used in the muscle, which is called the muscle full hypothesis, which is still being explored. That being said, you can totally eat one meal a day for dinner and still build muscle every day. I mean, this is just like the edges of theory. You don't have to eat 3 or 5 meals a day. People have gotten huge eating 1 or 2 meals a day. It's really just sometimes people, lose the forest for the trees and try to optimize everything, whereas it's probably better to optimize your sleep than to optimize your meal frequency for muscle gain. But it's easy just to focus on one thing.
Interesting, because in my thought process with, we'll call it, a lot of people are after the cover model physique, and a lot of people are listening. This is where the information is directed. Now we're looking at body composition both from a fat and muscle mass perspective, and obviously positive protein turnover, kind of the anabolic effect of your feeding routine. For me, would logically sound very important. Now, how much then should we be paying attention to muscle protein synthesis and how often we can stimulate it? Because my thought process is, we'll have a meal, we'll wait for the body to reset its kind of functions, and then we'll try and stimulate that process again so we get as big a bang for buck as possible. Now, for what I know of the research, and you'll obviously correct me, that is kind of, we'll say loosely around 4 hours, every 4 hours.
Yeah, that's about right. And that pattern of eating is great for muscle building. And it's statistically significantly better than eating less often or eating more often. That being said, sometimes people compare like 3 to 4 meals or 4 to 5 meals. That's nothing, really. It's really the more extremes that should be avoided. And I think if you're comparing meal frequency to other things, like one thing that people don't think about as much is what the best response is when you get slightly injured at the gym, like tweaking a muscle or a joint. In that case, you should probably focus mostly on that joint and recuperation and kind of forget micromanaging other stuff. And then there's some things that a lot of people don't know about, like vitamin C. Almost a lot of people get enough vitamin C, but if you get injured, like if you twist your ankle or something, you kind of really should. You have to take 500 milligrams of vitamin C or more a day for at least a month. Um, and some of this is theoretical, but there's a condition called reflex sympathetic dystrophy. It's now known as CRPS, chronic regional pain syndrome, which is the worst pain condition known to man. So sometimes people will get this rare condition if they'll like break a bone or twist their ankle or something like that, and then a day or two later, things start swelling up. A few days later, there's more hair growth. The joint turns warm. It's darker. And then sometimes it can elevate to the point where when you go outside and there's a brisk wind, it hurts your face or you're bedbound for your whole life. And there's no way around this. There's no treatment. But the way to prevent it is taking 500 milligrams of vitamin C, which has been shown in 2 or 3 big randomized trials to almost completely prevent this. The reason why that's applicable to the common gym rat is because the reason why pain persists is often to do with oxidation. And vitamin C is a good antioxidant. Not that you should take it right after weightlifting because that blunts muscle protein synthesis, but if you get injured, you have to maintain a certain level of vitamin C every day because that can help prevent the pain from persisting for a long time and keeping you out of the gym. So something like vitamin C is very important, and people kind of take it for granted. It should probably be paid more attention to, injury and pain rather than specifics of meal frequency.
Interesting, because it's something I recommend from a collagen synthesis point of view in injured people, and you've kind of added an angle on that, an angle that I didn't know about, because I have an adaptogen formula that I designed for a company, and that has vitamin C, and we recommend it in periods of recovery, recuperation, overtraining, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. You mentioned muscle building earlier. Muscle building, probably not as much as fat loss, but muscle building is probably the area where a lot of dreams are sold, especially in the kind of gym environment. You mentioned when you're a bit more training focused, you're looking at your performance, you throw a few extra things in there. Now I'm intrigued, what are your few extra things, you being the man who works at the research data center of the world?
Mm-hmm. So most everybody who lifts takes creatine, so that's kind of granted. That's I don't take it every day if I'm trying to increase performance, and it's not really, really logical, but if you stop taking creatine, then you still have extra creatine in your body for a while, and it is possible to slightly lower endogenous production of creatine. And although creatine is by far the most studied supplement, I still would never take something every day, every week of the year, because studies are done with a primary outcome in mind, and rarely is a comprehensive study done with multiple primary outcomes that's also powered to find all the side effects. Not that creatine has a ton of side effects, really no side effects almost, but just I would never take anything that regularly. So that being said, creatine, beta-alanine, of course, but things that increase performance that haven't really been studied for muscle gain as much, and some things in between, like sodium bicarb. And then there's things like, I think it's interesting to try to build muscle not from the performance angle, but from the recuperation angle. And there hasn't been studies on this, but you know how there's soft water and hard water?
Yep.
Soft water doesn't have minerals, hard water does. Almost nobody drinks hard water, mineral water. In the U.S., I think in Europe people drink mineral water more, but in the U.S. almost nobody does. A lot of trace minerals have very few studies per mineral, and I have a feeling that if you group all those trace minerals together and you get enough of them every day, there might be a chance that that person would build muscle better than somebody who is not getting all those trace minerals in high amounts. And the reason is that a lot of those trace minerals act as cofactors in reactions. And building muscle is a reaction that needs to be supported, and it's not just dependent on how much protein you eat. So I think it's interesting to try to approach muscle building from a health perspective. It just so happens that supporting health often ends up being things that can increase muscle gain, but it takes years and years to do the research to ever. So I try to optimize health and then see if that increases muscle gain. If you're an individual, it's really hard to find that out on your own because you can't do a randomized control trial on yourself. But I think if you take things that are good for health, they're not going to harm you. So you might as well try and see if you notice anything.
Sure. It's interesting. Your opinion is quite balanced, despite being a very research-focused individual and working for a company that was all about research. You bring a lot into the conversation that there's still a certain amount of logic that we need to try and play out and experiment with before the research picture becomes totally clear. And I suppose my kind of angle on that question is that transdermal based supplements are still a very, very new thing in the kind of nutrical world. They're not really in the medical world. They've been doing transdermal medicines for 20, 30 years. And you mentioned trace minerals. We have a recovery formula that we use transdermally applied to the muscles as soon as you train. So let's say you've bench pressed, you'll put it on like your pecs, shoulders, triceps, and it contains magnesium, zinc, arginine, niacin, and trace minerals. Now, it's it can be quite difficult for us because the research picture is far from clear when it comes to transdermal and how all these nutrients affect recovery. But we have to stand there and go, well, there's a certain amount we know about transdermal, there's a certain amount we know about all these nutrients, and part of us has to stand there and go, well, we've put logic together, we've started to use this supplement, a lot of people have claimed benefit, and we've kind of gone, well, we think we have a rationale to go to market. So we've gone to market, and while we're in the market, we're going to try and bring the research picture and obviously fund some of the research on transdermal technology. So I suppose my kind of ramble is multifaceted in that we've been using trace minerals. Also, what is kind of your opinion on the kind of transdermal element of nutrition? Do you think it'll expand? What do you see happening in the US? Because I don't really keep my eye on the US and what it's doing.
I think transdermal is a really cool area of both research and application. One of the reasons is that a lot of people do take a lot of pills and you don't want to swallow a lot of big horse pills every day. But second is a lot of the health elixirs of many years ago stemmed from things like mineral springs. And you would go to a mineral spring that had high sulfur levels or high whatever levels. You'd bathe in it for a while. Some of it might be heat and water, but some of it might be minerals. The evidence is mixed on like transdermal magnesium and that kind of thing. But I think the reason why we're never going to know for sure from research is that nutrition studies are really hard to do. So if you're going to do a controlled study of a transdermal nutrient, then you have to control for that nutrient in somebody's diet. So you have to have the money to do it, and you have to have the people with the time, and often you have to have a place to house them, like a hospital. So there's not going to ever be a ton of research on that stuff. And second is that if you look at the whole corpus of evidence on something like transdermal nutrients, then it's hard to evaluate what's true and what's not. Study quality is really the main thing we look at Examine, and it's really tough on both sides because a lot of people think, why don't they do a study on that? Or, why do these studies suck so much? Why is the methodology so bad? That's not really true. It's that when you do nutrition studies or, pharmaceutical studies or whatever, it starts with animal, mechanistic, in vitro studies. Next step is often a small pilot uncontrolled trial. Then is like a small RCT, then is bigger, and then a meta-analysis, and then a review of meta-analysis, an umbrella review. But you usually never get there because at some point in the road, either the issue seems like it's resolved, the issue isn't resolved, and you're not going to get more grant money because it just seems too confusing, or it's too hard to conduct a trial on that specific topic. So what we do is we'll look at something. We haven't looked at transdermal nutrients yet, but we'll look at something and we'll say, generally, are the studies good quality or bad quality, and do they agree with each other, and do they not? And then we come out with, sort of a summary. But like we were talking about right before the podcast, that changes every few months. So it's really hard to know for nutrition where the research stands. And that's why I try not to guide my own diet solely by what the research says, because the research changes, and maybe like a commonsensical diet plus research might be the most, balanced way to go.
Sure, because there's obviously an argument with everything, and especially there's a definite trend in the fitness industry right now is that why are you doing that? It doesn't have a paper behind it, and I am 100% for research and clarifying what we know and what we should do in the fitness industry, but we still have to blend that with, like you said, common sense, biology, physiology, mechanisms, and kind of piece it together. And granted, if we're doing anything that's verging on the extreme and the research is against that, then there's kind of a very easy conclusion to make. But when we're in this kind of grey area and we're all like, well, this isn't 100% concrete, but the rationale seems plausible and there's people benefiting, I suppose it doesn't sound like you would criticise this kind of grey area of research and art where people are still kind of dabbling. It's where the practitioners, I suppose, are getting their hands dirty with actual clients and doing things rather than not being overburdened by the research.
Yeah, and there's a few good ways to look at research. Like one that you said is using research to check sort of extreme conclusions is good. Another one is like for something like vitamin D, there's a ton of research. So you can look at a certain area of the research versus another certain area. And there's been some pilot trials where like vitamin D is used in a senior center. I think there was one in Wisconsin that used vitamin D. The next year, there was very little influenza, whereas there was a ton the year before. Okay, some of that might be seasonal, but a lot of it probably has to do with vitamin D. That was the only change. That being said, there was an umbrella review, so a review of all the other reviews of vitamin D last year, and the conclusion was there's not a lot of outcomes for which vitamin D has actually been shown to work, so maybe we should check ourselves with suggesting vitamin D for patients. I think that's kind of bullshit, because if you look at all the studies for a given outcome for vitamin D, they're going to be confounded by all these different things. Even if it's a randomized trial, somebody's certain sample's lifestyle might not be so that they can benefit from vitamin D. But if it's somebody who's paying attention to their diet and exercise, vitamin D might be the thing that could really push them to health. So, or they could be taking different dosages, or not taking vitamin D with fat so that they're not absorbing it, or whatever. You can't really control for the quality of those studies. So to make a conclusion like there's not a lot of outcomes where vitamin D has been shown to work, I think that's really short-sighted. Obviously, we need vitamin D. Some dermatologists might say not to get much sunshine because of skin cancer risk, but people have been getting a decent amount of sun, not all day, every day, but a decent amount for a long time. Vitamin D is something intuitively that we should really watch out for, and it's going to lead to benefit, whatever the evidence reviews say. But something like fish oil, some studies say that fish oil has benefits for cardiovascular disease, some say it doesn't. And then some reviews try to explain why. And I think those have kind of done a good job, because it might be that some studies don't show benefit because some of the fish oil might be a bit oxidized. Or the people were taking fish oil, but they also had high omega-6 levels in their diet. So those things, I think, do shed some light into the issue. So it's not the results that matter so much to me. Like P is less than 0.05, who cares? It's what is the mechanism? Does the mechanism make sense? Is the research good quality? Unfortunately, it takes a while to understand that kind of stuff. It's much easier to look at the abstract and see if P is less than 0.05. But, What can you do?
Because having had a lot of experience rummaging through your site for various things, for my own learning and teachings, you outline the research on a lot of your web pages, and then you kind of say, well, the research is kind of showing this, and then you almost throw in some opinion on your pages with some supplements, based on what kind of seems plausible, and I kind of find that refreshing, in that you're still showing that the picture is very unclear, and that there is mechanisms, especially for certain populations in certain situations, for different supplements.
In a perfect world, we would never have to give our opinion, but when you have an issue that is a mix of studies in diabetic rats and postmenopausal women, where there's one study on athletes, we have to give our opinion on whether this applies to people who are reading or not. Because there's never going to be a study where there's 100 people that exactly match the person who's reading the study. And that's, while unfortunate, it just means that it's good. You know, there's a lot of studies on different types of people, and just you have to find the ones that apply to yourself.
I suppose to sort of clarify for other people why Examine might be a voice of reason in the topic of supplementation and why your opinion might be valid. Who else is working with you at Examine? What kind of expertise is behind the scene to say that, do you know what, we think we're a credible bunch of people and you can kind of listen to us and trust us?
So, for example, for our research digest, we have, I think, 7 reviewers who look at our synopses of the research, as well as a couple editors. So the editors include a doctor of pharmacy and a PhD in toxicology. And the reviewers are a couple of physicians, an obesity medicine physician and a family practitioner, as well as a sports medicine physician, a neurobiologist, and then a couple RDs. So we try to approach things from a few different angles, and that's because, you know, lay people, maybe not people listening to this podcast, but a lot of lay people will look at a physician's opinion as the gospel truth. And, you know, I don't blame them because we're kind of trained that way, but physicians, at least in the US, get an hour or 2 of nutrition education, you know, when they're in med school. So they often don't know as much as even somebody who's done a decent amount of reading and who doesn't even have a college degree. So that's physicians. And then another area which is super interesting to me is natural medicine, because my sister is a naturopath, but, you know, I try to stay away from like magic woo-woo treatments that probably don't have any basis. Like, you know, I've tried homeopathy, I've tried Reiki, you know, not somebody holding their hands over your body and energy being transferred and stuff. There is no mechanism. There's almost no way any of that works. But natural medicine practitioners or chiropractic medicine or, you know, things like that, they often have some basis in their holistic suggestions to their patients, because they'll have like half an hour to an hour to provide for their patients, whereas a physician has 15 minutes because of insurance and, you know, that kind of thing. So I'll read things by naturopaths, and often there's some grain of truth because they deal with a lot of patients with a lot of different clinical conditions and comorbidities. And that's really where the interesting area of research is. It's if you're an athlete, but if you're burned out, you know, do you have adrenal insufficiency? Is adrenal fatigue, is that even a real thing? If you're not sleeping enough, but if you're still really strong and able to recover from injury. And rather than, you know, a blanket study on a certain topic, I like reading forums. You know, I like seeing people's opinions of what worked and what didn't, because the practice is often way ahead of the research. And we do the research, but we also keep an eye on the other stuff.
Interesting. Fascinating. I suppose we should kind of switch it on its head slightly and talk about fat loss, because I think it's an area that probably has the most marketing dogma around it, purely because there's just so much money to be made in mass market. When it comes to fat loss, there's all sorts of supplements, acai berries, all sorts of funny things. For general population just looking to lose body fat, is there really anything fat loss supplementation wise where you think, Joe, actually you take that, you're gonna lose an extra pound or 2 a month? There's gonna be a positive effect there.
So there's very, very, very few, and the 2 that really are both accessible and kind of work are green tea and caffeine. Sure. It's caffeine mostly stacked with other things, because once you get some tolerance to it, you're not really going to lose fat unless you cycle it wisely. Green tea, there's been at least a couple of meta-analyses on weight loss, one of which I peer-reviewed just a couple of years ago, I think, for a journal, which was a very high-quality meta-analysis that did show a little bit of extra weight loss from green tea. That being said, it won't really even be noticeable. I mean, if you drink green tea, you should somewhat drink it for its health-giving properties, because you're not going to notice the fat loss as much. If you're a competitor, it's totally different. You could stack some things like caffeine, green tea, yohimbe. Just there's not very much stuff that you can stack and lose enough fat for there to be, an extra, vein or two popping out. But for the general population and most athletes, there's very little in terms of fat loss you can do. The two areas that don't have a lot of research that get promoted the most are fat loss and testosterone boosting. And it's too bad that it isn't the flip side, like general health supplements that get advocated most. But that's just the way it is, and it's probably never going to change.
Nice. Yeah, testosterone's another one that you can sell any guy up the river, because again, it's that kind of, well, what if I could just get a couple of more testosterone notches? I'll be an animal in the bedroom and I'll be an animal in the gym. And
yeah, I mean, testosterone is super important, and marketers play on the fact that it's super important, but you're not going to raise it through a supplement that you get, on the shelf at your pharmacy.
Surely, okay, so to kind of counter-argue that in a way, if there was something to increase testosterone, would you say that all they've done is increased their testosterone status within their normal physiological range? So they haven't boosted it, they've just optimized it for them?
Yeah, so there are some things that could slightly raise testosterone, but there's nothing that raises testosterone above physiological levels.
Sure.
Like a simple testosterone gel patch, whatever, syringe, that will raise testosterone like at least 3 times what you have. Nothing over the counter is going to do anything close to that. Really, the thing that you should concentrate on for testosterone is recovery and general health, because hormones interact with each other and depend on your lifestyle more so than a certain supplement. So, as is often the case, general health leads to improvements at the gym.
Well, I teach in a lot of my seminars these days that performance comes from the inside out, and if I was doing my sports nutrition seminar 20 years ago, I'd probably be talking about making sure you eat lots of whole grains and then having a Lucozade while you train and maybe using creatine. But now it's like, right, let's check that you're sleeping right, let's check that your gut health and your immunity is good, that you're cycling your training intelligently. And I suppose that pairs hand in hand with one of your initial comments, was that once you've got more and more into the research, your supplement cabinet has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk.
Yeah, and I've also seen that for my personal life and like the lives of my friends and significant others, if you list out the things that'll affect your health and your performance at the gym from number 1 to number 10, often number 1 is something like being on the internet too much, internet addiction, because you end up staying up late too much, you get not enough melatonin synthesis, and also it's probably affecting your brain, your wiring, because you're a little bit conditioned for, that dopamine release, and you need a fix, and you need to know right away, like who starred in this movie or like what the answer to whatever is. And Amazon has this speaker out now that just came out, what's called, I don't know, Echo, where you put it in your kitchen or whatever, and from wherever in your house you can say, Amazon, or what's it called, Alexa, what was Richard Pryor's first movie? Like who won the World Cup in 2004, and it'll yell it back at you. I think that's terrible, not just for, life, but for health, because we're going to get at the point now in 5 or 10 years where I already see 5-year-olds with iPads. Soon it's going to be like 3-year-olds with iPads before they can form words. And then people won't even really be going to the gym. They'll be doing whatever crazy workout thing they can do at home so that they don't have to move at all. And it's going to be like that movie WALL-E. So I'd say first is like internet and, just what you're doing with your spare time and whether you're outside in nature. And then, second might be sleep and stuff like that. And like 10th or 11th is focusing on what you're doing at the gym. But those first few things are really important, and they can't really be studied that well.
Nice. I was going to mention the WALL-E thing, because I remember watching it and I thought, do you know what the scary thing is? I see a world like that. I see a world so fit, but they're fit from such a uniform approach that we end up eating like a pre-packaged meal that's 500 calories for breakfast and doing the same for lunch and doing your 20 minutes on the treadmill with this, this, and this, and there's companies that end up uniforming what we eat and what we drink and how we move, so much so that everyone has a normal weight, but it's so monotonous that it's never really connected with anything to do with the environment or self-exploration.
That reminds me of, there was this British show that I just watched, I think it's called Black Mirror, which is about pitfalls of technology. And it ends up being like WALL-E, except in order to provide energy for the human race, people ride these bikes, like stationary bikes, and then they go to bed and they do the same thing every day. And that's good, to have a faster time is good. But what are you training for? You're just training to get faster on your bike, or you're lifting weights just to lift more weights. And then people never get outside. And I think it's kind of sad. And England and the US, that's probably the two headquarters, because in some other countries people do have more varied lives. Anyway, that's getting far away from supplements, but that's what's on my mind a lot.
No, but it's good. It's real. I've brought you onto the show, and you're very much a man of supplements and research, and you've given an awful lot of balance to the argument. And it's probably refreshing for people to hear that they're probably doing a lot of the right thing a lot of the time. Hopefully, especially if they listen to this podcast, and that you kept coming back to sleep, the importance of nutrition, lifestyle, all that kind of stuff. That is really the 95%, and supplements is the kind of 5 to 10%.
Yeah, if you feel like you need to take supplements for general health, then forget about it. But if you have a condition that might be helped by supplements, go for it. I think that's awesome. And occasionally a supplement can make it so that you don't have to have a surgery or take some pharmaceutical, and that's great. Other than that, focus on things that intuitively seem important, because they probably are.
Nice. I'm interested. What do Examine have up their sleeve next? You mentioned bringing more information on kind of like micronutrition and macronutrient into the website. What's the plan? What can we expect? Because whatever you do seems good.
So sometime this spring or summer, we're planning on finishing up all the micronutrients. And then we're also hopefully, this isn't set in stone yet, but we're hopefully going to turn a little more focus on the foods. With the theory just being that micronutrients are super important, but people don't eat micronutrients, they eat foods. Mm-hmm. So people want to know about foods and diets, and there is research on foods and diets, although the research isn't always very good. So we want to translate that, for example, some very common foods that are always in controversy are like bread. What's up with bread? What percentage of people are gluten intolerant? Is gluten intolerant a real thing? Mm-hmm. Are there other things other than gluten that people should watch out for? What types of grains don't have gluten and could be alternatives? That kind of thing.
Interesting. Always creating more good information. I've been in touch with Sol from Examine quite a bit in the past, and he always tells me he's retiring, but it sounds like you're making him do more work.
Yeah, he is. I think he retires every couple months. He will be heading off to greener pastures, doing something else after a break. But you can't get away from nutrition once you start. It just keeps pulling you back.
It does.
It's too hard.
It does. Right. Thank you very much for being on the show. This has been fantastic. It's been really refreshing. I want people to go away and find your information. Obviously, when I post the show, I will post some links up so people can find your various information. But where should people go if they want to find out more?
So luckily, we're easy to remember, Examine.com. Whole website is free. If you do want to help support us, we're not supported by advertising. To be 100% objective, all we do is sell information. So we have 3 products. The Supplement Goals Reference, which makes it easy to click on a certain supplement or goal and see all the research behind it. The Stack Guides, 16 different goals like muscle gain, fat loss, aesthetics like skin, hair kind of thing. And the new one that's going to come out is anxiety. So that provides for people who don't have a lot of time, just 5 or 10 minutes of exactly what you need to do and what the research says for a group of different supplements or nutrients. And then our newest product is the Examinecom Research Digest, ERD. Every month, we go through all the research from the previous few months, find the 8 most important articles for our readership, and just tear the hell out of them. We go through all the methodology, all the context in other studies, how it applies to different people, strengths and weaknesses. Plus, we have a couple interviews with actual researchers. So, like this past month, we looked at D-serine, an amino acid or an analog of amino acid that could potentially help depression. Fish oil quality, we looked at fish oil supplements and what percentage of them are oxidized and what percentage of them meet their label claims. So we look at the most practical and important things, and we go very, very in depth. So if you're a nutrition junkie, then that's something to look into. We always look forward to emails from people. You don't have to send us a study. If you find a study that we don't have, we'd love to look at it. But send us what you think, what you'd like to see, and just say hi. Click on contact for Examine.com, and we look forward to see you online.
Nice. Just a quick reference to the fish oil you mentioned. It was actually a scarily high number of companies that were selling oxidized fish oil, right?
Oh yeah, it was, 83, 89, 90%, and only 3 out of something like 37 supplements sold in New Zealand, but it applies around the world, met their label claims. So fish oil quality is not very high.
That's scary.
You should really either go, some companies voluntarily get their products tested by the international something standards. The link is in our product. Or call them, because you don't want to be taking somewhat rancid fish oil every day.
No.
It's not good.
100%. I mean, we can argue about fat all we like, but the worst kind of fat is oxidized fat, whether it's whatever form it was originally.
Yeah, I mean, our body's going to oxidize some fat anyway, so don't already take in oxidized fat. It's very counterproductive.
Right. Thank you very much. Just to mention the ERD that Kamal talked about, we actually have that as part of our Academy program, which launches in April, which by the time this podcast comes out will probably have relapsed anyway. But we provide that as part of our program because we believe that you need to keep up to date with the research and allow that to continue your further learning and stay objective about all of this. As usual, if you enjoyed the show, please do me a massive favour of sharing it. Share it somewhere, Facebook, Twitter, with a friend, give it to a work colleague, someone that would value this information. When you see it come up on Facebook or Twitter, give it a retweet, a like, share it with someone, tag them in, share the information. It's the only way shows like this grow. If you've got a question for the next show, which will be me and Rachel doing a standard Q&A show, please email bencoomber@gmail.com and your question will get thrown into the mix. Make sure it's good, make sure there's plenty of detail there, the detail that we need to help you out. Again, Kamal, thank you very much for being on the guest on the show. It's been amazing.
It's been my pleasure. Love talking about this stuff.
And for all you guys that need to check it out, go to Examine.com. Otherwise, I will see you very, very soon. In fact, I will see you next week. Ciao. Hey everyone, Ben Coomer Radio, episode number 131. Rachel is not with me today, but I have 2 other people. We are doing Ben Coomer Radio, first ever 3-way show.